This is an ABC News special report. The death of President Jimmy Carter.
I'm Mary Bruce at ABC News headquarters in New York. We are coming on the air at this hour because we have just learned that former President Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, has died. He was 100 years old.
Welcome, everyone, to the Hurting Humanity channel. Well, I guess they finally ran out of that red liquid. At least Jimmy ran out of that red liquid that these elites love so much that continues to give them the fountain of youth, even though one would say that Jimmy hasn't looked too youthful lately, of course. Jimmy's looked more like the Crypt Keeper or the grandfather from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but too soon? Sorry. But Jimmy Carter has passed away at the age of 100, as do most of these elites who continue to pass away or transfer vessels when they get close to the age of 100, like his close associate David Rockefeller, who I'll get into in a few minutes. But you're going to hear a lot of tributes out there to Jimmy Carter. You're going to hear the alt-right media talk about how Jimmy Carter was a Democrat and he was one of the worst presidents of all time. You're going to hear the Democrats talk about Jimmy Carter and what a wonderful humanitarian he is. But let me give you the truth that none of them will actually give you about Jimmy Carter and his role in establishing the New World Order. Because just like everybody else who becomes a president, they serve a purpose. They are put in these positions of power to further the New World Order agenda. And what I think of most, before I'll get into Jimmy Carter and the New World Order and the Trilateral Commission, what I think of most with Jimmy Carter is actually recent. Because I remember in 2015, when the media was pretty much giving a eulogy 9 years ago for Jimmy Carter, because we were told that he was diagnosed with cancer back in 2015. And they said that it was inoperable, that Jimmy only had a short amount of time left. And then shortly after hearing that news about Jimmy, suddenly Jimmy's grandson suddenly just died mysteriously. Nobody really knows what happened. He was 28 years old. He was at Jimmy's home for Thanksgiving dinner away from his parents, hanging out with Jimmy and Jimmy's wife. And the next thing you know, his grandson died. And of course, since then, Jimmy suddenly, somehow, survived inoperable brain cancer. And in fact, if you don't think that story is suspicious enough, here's Jimmy talking about right after this happened to his son. Here is his robotic speech that he gave at a local church.
Sorry I'm late. First of all, I've been late. We had a call almost 12 o'clock that our grandson, who lives in Peachtree City and is 28 years old, a very special child who spent Thanksgiving with us instead of with his parents. He didn't feel well yesterday, and he was at home with his mother. And when he got ready to eat supper, he told his mother he thought he'd go lie down a while. So he went to his room and lay on the bed, and she went to see if he was okay. And his heart quit beating. They took him to the hospital, and we got there, I guess, about 1:30 this morning. And after we were there for about 20 minutes, his heart stopped beating again. So they tried to give him CPR, but he passed away. And he was just 28 and a very wonderful young man whom we love very much.
It didn't seem like he was grieving too much. Couple smiles in there. I mean, when you lose a 28-year-old grandson, you'd think there'd be more emotion involved. But let's get into Jimmy Carter and his role in what he has brought into the government, which, of course, was bringing in the Trilateral Commission, which most people out there don't ever hear about or talk about. We always hear about the World Economic Forum, but we don't hear about some of the other secret groups like the Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission. So let's start with Jimmy in general. Jimmy was presented to us as a peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia, kind of like kind of like the role that most of these guys play nowadays, where they pretend to be kind of incompetent fools like Joe Biden. People, they're here for the people. They're humanitarians, right? But Jimmy Carter was one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission, along with David Rockefeller and a man you're going to hear a lot about in this video, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and we'll just call him Mr. Brzezinski for short. They established what is known as the Trilateral Commission. You may have seen this logo before for the Trilateral Commission. Do you notice the 666 in the logo of the Trilateral Commission? Because, of course, we know that number 666 refers to the book of Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And that's why we see in all of these globalist companies, corporations, we see the 666 logo right in front of our faces. The Trilateral Commission has the 666 blatantly in front of our faces. The World Economic Forum, the 666 right in front of our faces. CERN, the 666 right in front of our faces. Google with Google Chrome, 666, not to mention that word Chrome, which is kind of what I was referencing earlier in the video when I was talking about that stuff that Jimmy seems to have run out of at the age of 100. So there's many companies that are in our faces that are large corporations or large entities like the Trilateral Commission that use the 666 in their logos, and there's many more. So what is the Trilateral Commission? It is a non-governmental organization that brings together influential leaders from North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific to discuss and propose solutions to major global issues, primarily focusing on promoting cooperation and mutual understanding between these regions through dialogue on political, economic, and security matters, essentially acting as a forum for high-level discussion on international challenges facing the world's major democratic industrialized areas. And that might sound like a bit of mumbo-jumbo that makes it sound like a legit group. But what you have to remember when you hear about the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, non-governmental organization, and when you hear them speak at these places, when they come out and they talk about what's on the agenda this year, these are non-elected people who are speaking on the behalf of humanity, even though we asked them to. And they're the ones who are causing all the chaos in the world. And of course, the ultimate goal is to bring about a world government. And the empire that we know of as America really has run through the Bilderberg meeting, the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. We know NATO. We know the World Economic Forum. These are the groups that are forming the New World Order. And David Rockefeller, Jimmy Carter, and Mr. Brzezinski were the three founders of the Trilateral Commission. While they'll tell you out in the open that it's really Rockefeller and Brzezinski, they don't want you to be suspicious of Jimmy Carter's involvement, because Jimmy Carter was then placed in as the president of the United States and started bringing in all of these globalists into our government. Again, infiltrating government. That's what this has been about. Here's some quotes from David Rockefeller, by the way, who founded this great organization with Jimmy Carter and Mr. Brzezinski. He says, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries." Another quote from David: "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and on conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." That's David Rockefeller. And there's many more quotes. And David, of course, was a key figure in the development of the World Trade Center. That, of course, eventually was no longer there, that David also had a hand in. Now, let's look over at Mr. Brzezinski, because this is where we could really look at everything going on in the world today. All the stuff I talk about with Elon Musk, all the stuff you see, it actually goes back to Brzezinski and these guys in past centuries that, of course, have been able to hide underneath hide in the shadow, so to speak, because the media, the technology wasn't the way it is now. And Brzezinski is somebody who was born in Poland And after Jimmy Carter was put in as president, he brought Brzezinski in from the Trilateral Commission to be an advisor. So he had a role inside of the White House. And here are just a couple of quotes so you can have a better understanding of Brzezinski here, who, again, was appointed by Jimmy Carter to infiltrate our government. Quote, "We have a large public that is very ignorant about public affairs and very susceptible to simplistic slogans by candidates who appear out of nowhere, have no track record, but mouth appealing slogans." Goes on to say, "It used to be so much easier to control 1 million people than to kill them. But today, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control them." Right? That sounds like a wonderful guy. The kind of guy you want to bring home to mom, or just the kind of guy you want in your government, right? Or here's another quote, "Shortly, the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information they've been given on the previous night's news." Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like the people that are all around us? Now think about back then when a quote like this came out. They knew that eventually the advancements in technology would enable them to have full control over the mind, eventually getting the technology inside of people's bodies, but at a time period where there was just the news, right? But that didn't mean everybody watched the news. Now, what would occur is a lot of people who did watch the news would then go tell other people about what they saw in the news. They call it water cooler talk. Now they just have completely manipulated people's minds so much because there's so much technology. Everyone has a phone in their hand. They're constantly getting bombarded with fake news. And of course, the information flow comes from them, so they're able to dictate what you know and what you don't know. Now, one of the things about this guy that's really, really important is that he was a technocrat. Does that word sound familiar? He came up with what is called the technocratic era, and it was a concept described in between two ages. He has written about technocracy, a system of government that uses technical decision-making and experts in place of politicians and business people. You might say, wait, didn't you just talk about this? I did, and I'll show you in a second. Here's a quote from him. Again, this is somebody who was in the White House, an advisor to a president. Sounds a lot like what I'm about to read, what's going on in today's world, right? He said, "Speaking of a future, at most only decades away, an experimenter in intelligence control asserted, 'I foresee a time when we shall have the means and therefore inevitably the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all the people through environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain.'" How does that sound? Environmental, like fluoride in the water, chemtrailing in the sky, the poison in our food. Biochemical as well. And when he's talking about manipulation of the brain, being that his book is about the technocratic era to come, does it sound a lot like this guy? You know, this guy from Project Mars, Elon, who is talking about the same exact thing, controlling the brain, creating a neural lace is the thing that really matters for humanity to achieve symbiosis with machines. Or other times he's talked about, if successful, X will evolve to be more the collective consciousness of humanity, or more accurately, the human machine collective, or X as humanity's collective consciousness, and of course, accelerating Starship development to build the Martian technocracy. So there's a common theme between Trilateral Commission founder Jimmy Carter's right-hand man, Mr. Brzezinski, and technocracy with Elon Musk, who we're now seeing front and center in our new government, where he's openly talking about a new world. And of course, when I talk about technocracy, I just discussed this. In science we trust is the motto. Joshua Haldeman was the leader of Technocracy Incorporated. That is Elon Musk's grandfather. So if that's not a direct correlation back then in the 1960s and 70s, knowing what the plan was for the future, this has been planned for a long time. What was needed was society's compliance and more technology, because the more technology is in place, the more technology is in your hand and surrounding you at all times, the more control they have over your mind, because they can influence what you think is real versus what isn't real. And the news itself is manufactured to give you a viewpoint of the world that they want you to have, so that they can form and formulate, I should say, your behaviors. We've heard Larry Fink talk about behavioral control many times, because this is something that's been going on throughout human history. Just now more than ever, we're getting closer to the end of this. Because when he talked about being able to control and manipulate the brain, well, we're at a time period where there's human beings walking around with Neuralinks in their skull. And some people are being injected with this nanotech and don't even realize it. So back to Jimmy Carter. There's another thing to note with Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, I believe, is the first president on record who talked about UFOs and spacecraft. He had a Voyager spacecraft statement that he put out. And in this statement, he talks about human beings divided into nation states, but these states are rapidly becoming a single global civilization. Let me repeat that. We human beings are all still divided into nation states, but these states are rapidly becoming a single global civilization. And in this Voyager letter, he says this Voyager spacecraft was constructed by the United States of America. We are a community of 240 million human beings among the more than 4 billion who inhabit the earth. We human beings are still divided, like I said, into nation states, but these states are rapidly becoming a single global civilization. Quote, we cast this message into the cosmos. It is likely to survive 1 billion years into our future, when our civilization is profoundly altered and the surface of the earth may be vastly changed. Out of 200 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, some perhaps many, may have inhabited planets and spacefaring civilizations. If one such civilization intercepts Voyager and can understand these recorded contents, here is our message. This is a present from a small distant world, a token of our sounds, our science, our images, our music, our thoughts, and our feelings. We are attempting to survive our time so we may live into yours. We hope someday, having solved the problems we face, to join a community of galactic civilizations. This record represents our hope and our determination and our goodwill in a vast and awesome universe. So this is really the first time a president has put something like this out, where they send something out, quote unquote, into space, where they expect aliens to intercept this. And listen to some of the wording here. We're talking about back in the 1970s, right? He says, when our civilization is profoundly altered and the surface of the earth may be vastly changed. That's because they have been planning and continue to do everything in their power to destroy the earth's surface, creating fires, dumping chemicals from the sky, shielding the sun, because they've been underground for quite some time. And Project Bluebeam has been a plan for quite some time. And bringing over these entities that we know exist on the other side has been part of their plan for quite some time. And Jimmy Carter, here's a clip if you don't know, even talked about how he saw a UFO in Georgia.
When I was back as a peanut farmer and the head of a lounge club in the southwest Georgia, I and about 25 others saw something in the air that changed colors and was round and came and left. We couldn't figure out what it was. It was unidentified.
Right? So if you don't understand what I'm getting at when I'm talking about UFOs and spacecraft and how they're going to use this to bring about a new world order, here is Ronald Reagan talking at the United Nations about how an outside force like an alien could really bring about globalism.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
And of course, while Ronald Reagan is not on record, from what I know, a member of the Trilateral Commission, I'm sure he's a member of many other of these groups, these secret groups, and many secret societies as well, because you don't become a president unless you are. His vice president was George H.W. Bush, who was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Of course, Bill Clinton was as well. George Bush's son is as well. And this is where we are today, thanks to people like Jimmy Carter, who have committed treason at the highest levels, who have openly talked about these things, but use words like humanity, caring about other countries, right? Using words like globalism to dupe the people out there into thinking that this is about helping other countries, and this is about world control. That's what this is about. This isn't a Democrat thing. This isn't a Republican thing. This is tyranny at its finest, right? We have the Council on Foreign Relations. We have the World Economic Forum. We have the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission. There's so many of these groups, right? And this saying says it best. Hi, we're building a world tyranny where everyone would be our slaves with no rights, property, or privacy. Seems that most of you are okay with that, so thanks. That's where we are. And that's why it's so important for them, the globalists, to continue to keep us in the left-right paradigm. That is the key structure, especially in America, to keep people divided between political parties that are both compromised. Because people look no further than thinking that voting for one of these guys that they've already handpicked, whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden, that you're going to see change, that things are going to get better for you. This is done to prevent revolutions from actually occurring. Because this is a small group of psychopathic, treasonistic Satanists who are doing all of this. They're creating all the wars. They're creating all the false flags that you see on the news. They're scripting our reality by whether they're making up stories like the United Healthcare story or any of these events that happen in schools, which are part of CAA Orion, Operation Orion. That's what they're doing. That's what they're responsible for. And if people realize just how warped they've made their minds because they've made things up, because they were able to get control of the mind. Some of those quotes that I read to you earlier, right? Shortly, the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information they've been given on the previous night's news. And you could thank people like Jimmy Carter, because when we look back and we say, how did they infiltrate government? Well, we could obviously start with George Washington, who was a Freemason, right? But we can look throughout history at things have changed and certain people have been put in, and taken out and removed. But the more that we allowed people, especially after Operation Paperclip, which is, I can almost guarantee you that Baczynski was a part of Operation Paperclip and brought over to infiltrate government over here. But the people like Jimmy Carter who let the corporations into government. Of course, Jimmy Carter was only put in as president because they told him that this was what he was going to do as a member and a creator of the Trilateral Commission. We'll put you in as president. You'll bring in so-and-so, appoint so-and-so, appoint so-and-so, and we'll continue to commit treason right in front of the public, but they won't know what's even happening. Just smile and wave on TV, push agendas that we have on the table, like, UFO invasions, convince people that it's real. Because at the time when Jimmy Carter wrote that, people were cracking up because there wasn't enough to brainwash people into believing in aliens then. Haven't you noticed that more and more people are believing this now? Not just because they're seeing manipulation in the sky by our government, but because of technology. Because they could release a movie every couple days about alien invasions. Because they could put all these guys in Congress talking about alien invasions and blast it on the news, whether it's liberal news or Republican news. Because the media is such a large part of people's lives, they're just living in a lie. Because that's all the media does. And they control and run all of it. The left, the right, the entertainment aspect of it. So that's what Jimmy Carter's legacy is to me. Bringing these people into power, pushing them further and further, specifically the Trilateral Commission, which, again, you may not have heard of it. I'm sure a lot of you have, depending on your age. But a lot of the young people out there only know of the World Economic Forum. Well, this is a version of the World Economic Forum. So the same way you view Klaus Schwab should be how you view David Rockefeller, which, I mean, everybody out there should already view the Rockefellers as that. But Brzezinski's like a post-modern day, pre-modern day Klaus Schwab. And so is Jimmy Carter. And so is Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy has kicked the bucket at 100. He's left his body. I guess it was just time. They probably told him, hey, we'll give you X amount of time left, and you could go out at 100, just like David Rockefeller went out at 101 and George Bush Sr. It's amazing what these people look like at 100. Not that I'd expect anybody to look, like a top model at 100 years old. None of us would. But boy, you could just see it on their faces, what's keeping them alive, because they don't even look alive. And that's why I used the picture of the grandpa from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Too soon? Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Well, when we live in a world where your government is trying everything they can do possibly to get control of your life and your family's life, and people like Jimmy Carter are responsible for it, it's hard to feel sympathy for any of them. And personally, I don't. I thank everybody for being here. I hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families as always.